Today's the day.
So, The Woman in the Yard is a new horror movie released by Blumhouse. I checked it out over the weekend and I'm here to talk about it. But unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good things to say about it, and that seems to be the general consensus of people that have gone to see it. Now, I walked in blind. I didn't know anything about this movie. I had seen the trailer play before. I think when I saw Hard Eyes or something like that, the trailer played before it. I try my best to not watch trailers anymore, but when you're in the movie theater, you're kind of just forced to. But it looked interesting. I was like, okay, there could be something to it. And the director made a few films that I've liked in the past, like the House of Wax remake from the 2000s. So I figured I would go and give it a shot. And although there are particular moments of cool things in this movie, that kind of plays into why I didn't like it, because every single time there was an element or an idea or even a way that they would film a particular sequence or a shot in the movie that would start to gather my interest and to start to make my head spin and make my head think and wonder what kind of direction this movie was going to go into, they would immediately offset it and go back to something that I was just not interested in whatsoever. It's a little bit hard to talk about without going into spoilers, so what I'm going to do is just kind of give you the general premise and my general thoughts about it, and then I'll say spoilers, and I'll just kind of like talk about what I feel the movie is actually about, and what I wanted it to be. So the title of the movie is The Woman in the Yard, and there is a woman who is sitting in the yard. Lives up to the expectation. No, essentially, this is a movie about grief, which a lot of horror movies do tackle this premise. We are dealing with a family living at a farm where the father had just passed away in a recent car accident, and the mother is still laid up in bed with a broken leg. She survived, he did not, and she has two kids to take care of, a teenage boy and a very, very young little girl. And of course, they are compromised in a lot of different ways, having trouble struggling financially, getting food in the house. Even the car battery is not working. So they're just kind of stuck here without much to their name. And all of a sudden, a woman who is wearing sort of like a funeral garb veil in front of her face, you can't really tell who she is or anything, just shows up sitting in their yard. And they go out to deal with it, but she starts saying some very strange things, like very uncomfortable, awkward things. And with that, other odd things start to happen, like their entire pen of chickens are just dead. Their family dog has disappeared. They don't know if it's dead. They don't know if it's not. The mother starts having hallucinations and visions of like doing horrible things to her children. And it's just sort of like a weird premise of, why is this woman out here? What does she know? Is this a supernatural threat? Is it a real person? And also the family itself being completely compromised because they can't go anywhere, they can't call for help, so they're just kind of stuck in the house essentially. Even though they're not really stuck, because the teenage boy could essentially just run to the nearest house if he really needed to, but the mom tells him not to. But basically, the mom is struggling a lot raising her children after the passing of the father of the household and keeping everything together. And, this woman shows up at the worst possible time for her family, making things even worse. Now, given the premise of this movie, I really feel like this would have worked a lot better as like a Twilight Zone episode, or a singular, maybe Black Mirror episode, I guess, is something more recent, like something that would be a half an hour to maybe like 45 minutes, 50 minutes at best of a runtime. Instead, they have to stretch it out to an entire 90 minutes, and the premise does not hold up for the entire film, even though the third act does try to get crazier. I'll get into spoilers here as to why it didn't work for me, but for the majority of this movie, it's just a family stuck in a house with a creepy woman sitting in their yard. And every time they look, well, not every single time, but, throughout the course of the day, the woman is getting closer and closer to the house. The chair keeps moving up. Every time they go out to talk to her, there's some weird, strange, incoherent conversation. And again, kind of like the hallucinations and the visions of things that are happening in the house. Once it does get into the third act, there's much more of a supernatural, sort of paranormal vibe going on, and it gets a little bit more exciting. But it's just not enough to like really sink your teeth into, and there's a lot of ideas here that don't work for me whatsoever. Overall, the movie was very tedious, very cliche, and although there are some moments in here, like there's some cool shadow work that they do, and there's some cool shots, and also just like kind of the creepy premise in general, like the shot of the woman sitting in the yard with just this open landscape behind her, just the fields and the hills and the clear sky and everything. It works for a great dynamic image. But overall, it just kind of falls apart. It is premise over execution, and it overstays its welcome real quick without a great payoff, and ultimately becomes pretty boring. And I understand it's a low budget movie, but I still think there's a lot more you could have done with this. And for me personally, it would have worked way better as like an episodic, episode of a horror centric TV show rather than an entire movie. So overall, I wasn't too big on it, although I do think there are a couple of brief moments that are pretty cool. But besides that, I'm going to get into spoilers because it's the kind of movie that you can only really talk about getting into spoilers. So if you care at all, go ahead and click off the video. But if you liked it first, that would be pretty awesome. But if not, let's get right into spoilers. So every single thing that I wanted out of this movie, they went in the opposite direction. So when the mother first speaks to the woman in the yard, they had this really creepy conversation. Might have been my favorite scene in the whole movie, the conversation that they had. And one of the lines that the woman in the yard says is that her children look delicious, delicious enough to eat. And again, I didn't know what this movie was about, so I was immediately thinking, is this going to turn into some like Jeepers Creepers kind of thing? Like, is this some sort of entity that only comes out every so often and it's stalking this family? You know, it's killed their chickens, it's killed their dog, it's like slowly working its way up to the house. I was like, ooh, like, let's get into this. I was excited. I was like, let's see where this goes. And then the woman just sits outside for the rest of the movie. No, basically the woman in the yard is this manifestation of the grief that the mother is going through, where she feels responsible for the car accident that killed the father of the household, and she's contemplating taking her own life. And this woman is here, kind of, it is that desire, that manifestation made physical, because the children see it and interact with it too. So it's actually like a real thing. It's not just like a hallucination of the mother. It's something the entire family can see. And I guess you could say, like, you know, the entire family feels the grief, but she's basically there to help the mother convince herself to take her own life. And I don't really have a problem with the bleakness of that idea. You know, it's not like the movie is too depressing for me or anything, but the thing that bothers me about it is I just wanted it to be something more exciting than that. There are various moments in this movie that have potential for greatness. One is the first interaction with the woman in the yard and this questioning of what kind of a creature could she possibly be. She's not a creature at all. There's also ways that she manifests her powers. Like, there's a lot of great shadow work when she starts getting closer to the house. They do sort of like you saw in Nosferatu, where, you know, the hand kind of like goes up the side of the house and it's able to control things. And also the visions that the mother has. There's this sequence where where the woman in the yard gets inside the house, takes the little girl, and the mother goes after her, and she goes down this corridor. Like, her house literally turns into this sort of like cavern, right? And it was the coolest thing ever. Like, she goes into this mirror. I think she goes into the mirror first, and you're going down this hallway, and the hallway gets smaller and smaller, and then the hallway starts to turn into like this like cement or brick, like to the side, where it's almost feeling like you're going into the cave of some kind of creature or monster. And I was like, oh my God, like, this could be cool. And then they don't do anything with that. And then the mother has this dream sequence where she's imagining the husband still alive, and the dream turns into a nightmare, and the husband puts, you know, like something over her face, like suffocating her. And then it cuts to her POV, where she is inside the veil of the woman in the yard. And we see that opening scene where she goes out to talk to the woman in the yard, but now it's from the woman in the yard's perspective. And when that happened, I was like, oh, this movie's about to get interesting. Like, she became the woman in the yard. So it was almost like we're going to see the whole movie now from the opposite perspective. Like, all these conversations they had, we're going to see it again, and it's going to have this different meaning to it and this different interpretation. Nope, we don't do any of that. That's just one very brief scene, and then it goes back to the dream sequence stuff. She doesn't become the woman in the yard, but that's like what it sets up. Like, that moment, I was like, this movie's about to get interesting. And I had so many moments like that. There were so many moments where I was like, this movie's about to get interesting. and then it doesn't. This movie's about to get interesting, and then it doesn't. And it's like every single thing I would have done with this movie, whether the woman in the yard is some kind of creature, whether the mother turns into the woman in the yard and you re-experience it from a different POV, or anything that would have like got you on the edge of your seat a little bit more. But the reveal is basically like the woman in the yard is a manifestation of your grief. I'm here to make you kill yourself. Okay. And the ending is like ambiguous, like she's there with the gun and the woman in the yard's convincing her to do it, but you don't see it happen. And then you see her come out of the house and reunite with her son and daughter, and you kind of wonder, is that actually real or is it not real? Because the movie ends with sort of this image of like the reversed R in a painting, sort of like she's still in the mirror dimension, but maybe she's not. It's ambiguous, but I don't know. At that point, the movie had lost me so much because there were so many other things that I wanted the movie to do. And I guess maybe that's not the fault of the movie. Like, if a movie isn't what I want it to be, that's not necessarily a criticism. But I just felt like there were so many avenues for potential for this movie to go down, and it chose to do none of them. And it went with the generic, I'm a manifestation of your grief and, you want to kill yourself. And I'm sure there are ways you could have done that could have still been interesting. But the way this movie does it is not. The first two acts are essentially just, there's a lady outside. The third act, the lady finally makes it in. There's a couple cool sequences, like I said, with that like corridor that she goes down. But then it turns into, cliche. And ultimately super disappointing. But anyways, guys, if you saw The Woman in the Yard, let me know what you think. Maybe you actually liked it. Maybe you hated it way more than me. Ultimately, I can't even say that I hated it. It was just like, okay. It's a movie to put on the background of a streaming service while you're cleaning your house. Anyways, guys, if you like this review, give it a thumbs up and a comment. Let me know what you think down below. Thanks as always for watching. Do appreciate it, guys. Please consider maybe the Patreon channel memberships to help out the channel. I could really, really use it, man. I'd appreciate it. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you next time.